The restaurant smelled like polished wood and old money, like conversations that never finished. Linen tablecloths held the quiet weight of history. Silverware lay aligned with ceremonial precision. It was the kind of place where mistakes felt loud even when no one spoke. Mara sat very still, hands folded over the small, undeniable curve beneath her dress. The baby moved once, a soft internal reminder, and she pressed her palm there, not to hush it, just to anchor herself. She had learned that stillness was safer than reaction. Stillness kept things from escalating. Stillness was how she survived rooms like this. Across the table, Victor watched the rim of his water glass instead of her face. He rotated it slowly, the circle leaving a damp ring on the cloth. His jaw tightened every few seconds, like a door trying not to slam. He had once promised he would always look at her when things got hard. That promise felt like it belonged to another marriage, another lifetime. The woman beside him leaned in close, her perfume sharp and floral, a scent that didn't belong to this table. Evelyn smiled too easily, fingers resting on Victor's forearm with practiced ownership. Her nails were flawless, pale pink, rounded, expensive. She wore white, which Mara found strange. White felt like a declaration. Mara hadn't known Evelyn would be here. No one had told her. She had arrived believing this was a family dinner, something gentle, something reconciliatory. Victor's mother had insisted. Just one meal. Just a conversation. We can breathe again afterward. The waiter poured wine Mara wouldn't drink. Red pooled in crystal glasses like a held breath. Somewhere behind them, a pianist played something slow and aching, notes drifting like unanswered questions. Evelyn laughed at something Victor murmured. Mara didn't hear the words. She watched instead how Victor's shoulders softened when Evelyn touched him. Watched how his face changed. That change hurt more than anything else so far. Mara felt suddenly very tired. Pregnancy had hollowed her out in ways no one warned her about. Not just the nausea, or the aching back, or the nights of shallow sleep. It was the way emotions arrived without warning, enormous and unmanageable, like weather systems forming inside her chest. Evelyn turned then, finally looking at Mara as if noticing a piece of furniture. Her gaze flicked down, lingered on Mara's stomach, then returned upward with something unreadable behind her eyes. So, Evelyn said lightly, breaking the silence that had stretched too far. You're really keeping it. The words landed wrong. Mara felt them in her throat. She swallowed. Yes, she said. Her voice sounded smaller than she intended. I am. Evelyn tilted her head, smile thinning. Brave, she said, and the word cut. Or foolish. Hard to tell sometimes. Victor's fingers stilled on the glass. He did not look up. Mara waited. She always waited. For Victor to say something. For someone to redirect the moment. Waiting had become second nature, like breathing shallow to avoid pain. Evelyn leaned back, crossing her arms. I just think it's unfair, she continued. Dragging a child into something already broken. Don't you? Mara felt heat rise behind her eyes. She focused on the table's edge, on the grain of the wood beneath the cloth. She thought of the baby's heartbeat she had heard that morning, fast and steady and stubborn. She thought of how she had cried alone in the car afterward, overwhelmed by love and terror in equal measure. I didn't come here to discuss this, Mara said quietly. Evelyn's laugh was short. Of course not. You never do. The slap happened so fast Mara didn't register it as pain at first. Just sound. A sharp, echoing crack that seemed to break the room open. Her head snapped sideways. The world tilted. Glasses rattled. Someone gasped. The pianist stopped playing. Her cheek burned seconds later, heat spreading like fire under skin. Her ears rang. She tasted metal. Instinctively, she curled inward, arms wrapping protectively around her stomach as she slid back in her chair. For a moment, no one moved. Victor stared at the tablecloth, eyes wide, breath shallow. His hands clenched into fists, then loosened. He did not stand. He did not speak. He did not reach for Mara. That was what hurt most. Evelyn stood, chest heaving, as if she had been struck instead. Don't look at me like that, she said, voice trembling with something close to rage. She needed to hear it. Mara couldn't hear anything clearly. The room swam. She focused on breathing. In. Out. The baby kicked again, frantic now, and panic flared hot and immediate. Then a chair scraped loudly. Victor's mother rose slowly from her seat at the head of the table. Helen had been quiet all evening, hands folded, eyes observant. Age had softened her movements but not her presence. When she stood, the air changed. It always did. Helen looked first at Mara. Really looked. She crossed the space between them and cupped Mara's face gently, thumb brushing the reddening skin with infinite care. Her touch was cool, grounding. "I've got you," Helen whispered, for Mara alone. Then she turned. Helen faced Evelyn with a calm that felt terrifying. No raised voice. No dramatic gesture. Just stillness sharpened into resolve. "You will leave," Helen said. "Now." Evelyn scoffed. "You don't get to." "I do," Helen interrupted, quietly. "In this family. At this table. You are done." Victor finally looked up. His mouth opened, then closed. He looked between the two women like a child caught between storms. Helen did not look at him. She reached into her purse, withdrew a folded envelope, and placed it carefully on the table in front of Evelyn. "Everything you thought you had," Helen said, voice steady. "You don't. I fixed that this morning." The room held its breath. Evelyn stared at the envelope, color draining from her face. Silence pressed in from all sides, thick and merciless. Mara watched from her chair, cheek burning, heart racing, as the world shifted in a way she didn't yet understand. Nothing felt resolved. Only exposed. Mara's cheek kept burning long after the sound of it had died. The restaurant had resumed its careful life in small, embarrassed motions. A server replaced a glass that hadn't even shattered. Someone at a nearby table pretended not to stare. The pianist's hands hovered over the keys, then lowered, then lifted again as if the music itself was unsure whether it was allowed to exist. Mara sat with both arms around her stomach like a belt. She could feel her pulse in her fingertips. Each beat seemed to travel through the baby, through her, through the thin cloth of her dress. She tried to slow her breathing the way the prenatal instructor had shown them, but all she could hear was that crack, that moment where her body had become an object, a thing to be corrected. Helen's hand stayed on her shoulder, steady, warm. It was the only part of the room that didn't wobble. Across the table, Evelyn's stare had gotten fixed, almost hungry, but the hunger was changing into something else. She didn't reach for the envelope. She didn't stand down either. She looked like someone who had spent her life believing doors would open if she pushed. Victor finally moved. He set his water glass down as though it weighed too much. "Mom," he said, voice thin, meant to soothe. "What did you do?" Helen didn't look at him. She was watching Evelyn with the calm attention of someone reading a ledger. "I asked you to leave," Helen said again, not louder, just more final. The kind of tone that didn't argue. It ended. Evelyn's fingers tightened around the edge of her chair. "You can't just toss me out because you don't like me," she said. Her voice wavered, and she hated that it did. "Victor invited me." Mara flinched at the word invited. It was such a gentle verb for what had happened to their marriage. As if betrayal was something you could RSVP to. Victor's eyes flicked toward Mara, then away. He couldn't hold her gaze. He couldn't hold the weight of what she had just endured in front of everyone, like the room itself was a witness he didn't want. Helen's attention finally shifted, just a fraction, landing on Victor as if he were a stranger who had wandered in. "Your invitations," she said, "have caused enough damage." Victor swallowed. His throat moved like he was trying to force down something sharp. "Mom, please. Don't make this worse." Mara almost laughed. Worse. As if her face didn't sting, as if her child hadn't jolted in fear, as if she wasn't sitting there with her hands shaking under the table and a silence inside her where trust used to be. Helen picked up her own napkin and folded it, neat and careful. "I'm not making anything worse," she said. "I'm naming it." Evelyn's gaze snapped to Mara then, sharp as a pin. "Oh, don't play saint," she hissed. "You knew. You knew he wasn't happy. You just held on anyway. Like a habit. Like pity." Mara's throat closed. She wanted to say that she hadn't known the shape of his unhappiness until it had turned into someone else's hands on his arm. She wanted to say she had tried, in 1,000 small ways, to return to each other. New routines. New jokes. New dinners. New softness. She wanted to say she had stayed because leaving felt like death, and because love, even when it's bruised, is a kind of faith. But her voice wouldn't come. Instead, her mind played a small, humiliating memory. A night months ago, Victor in the bathroom with the door half shut, phone glowing in his hands. She had asked who it was. He had smiled too quickly and said a work thing. Work. Always work. A word that could cover anything. Helen stepped closer to Evelyn, hands still, posture straight. You put your hand on Mara, Helen said, and her voice finally showed its edge. Not anger. Something older. A moral gravity. In public. In front of her child. Evelyn's chin lifted, defensive. She's not a child. She's a grown woman. She can handle. She can't, Helen said simply. No one should have to. Helen's eyes dropped briefly to Mara's stomach, and for a moment Mara felt seen in a way that made her chest ache. Not as a problem. Not as a cautionary tale. As a person carrying something fragile into a world that had been careless with her. Evelyn's gaze flicked to the envelope again. Curiosity, fear. She reached toward it at last, 2 fingers sliding under the flap as though it might bite. She pulled out the papers slowly, like a magician pretending not to know what was inside. The first page had a letterhead. The second had numbers. The third had a signature line with Helen's name on it. Evelyn's face changed in increments, as if each sentence rewrote a piece of her reality. Her lips parted. Closed. Parted again. What is this? She whispered, and the whisper wasn't delicate. It was raw. It's the correction, Helen said. Victor leaned forward. Mom, what did you? Helen held up a hand, not even looking at him, and the gesture silenced him as if he were 8 years old again. I promised your father, she said, that if you ever forgot what decency looks like, I would not stand by and watch you ruin someone else to excuse yourself. Mara's eyes stung. Her cheek throbbed. She kept breathing anyway, because she had to. Because there was a small heartbeat depending on her. Evelyn shook her head, still reading. Her voice rose, thin with panic. This can't be, this says, no. Helen, you can't. Helen nodded once. I can. Evelyn's fingers started to tremble. Paper fluttered. You're freezing the account, she said, as if she couldn't believe the words had arranged themselves that way. You're removing me from the board. Your consulting contract ends tonight, Helen said. The apartment you've been staying in is held by a family trust. You have 48 hours to vacate. There is also a restraining notice concerning Mara's home and workplace. You will not be near her again. Mara felt something break open in her chest. Not triumph. Not satisfaction. Relief was too small a word. It was more like air returning to a room that had been sealed. Evelyn looked up at Victor, eyes wild. You knew about this. Victor looked as if he had been hit. I didn't, he said, and for once his voice sounded true. Evelyn, I didn't know. Mara watched him speak, and a cold clarity settled over her. He hadn't known because he hadn't been paying attention. Not to his mother, not to his wife, not to the slow unmaking happening under his own roof. He had been drifting wherever things felt easiest. Evelyn's gaze swung back to Mara, and something bitter twisted there. You think this means you win, she said, voice trembling. You think. Mara finally found her voice. It came out soft, almost tired. There's no winning, she said. There's just what's left. Helen's hand tightened on Mara's shoulder. And what's left, Helen said quietly, will be protected. The room seemed to hold them in a hush, strangers pretending not to listen while listening anyway. Victor stared at the table as if the linen might offer a script for what to do next. Evelyn sat rigid, papers crumpled in her grip, like a person waking up to a world that did not care about her charm. Mara pressed her palm to her belly and felt the baby settle, a small shift, a hesitant quiet. And in that quiet, She realized something that hurt in a different way than the slap. Helen was protecting her. Victor never had. Victor did not follow Evelyn when she left. He watched her walk away through the tall glass doors, heels clicking too fast, posture already cracking. He watched because it was easier than turning toward the woman still seated at the table, the one whose cheek bore his silence like a bruise that hadn't finished forming. When the doors closed, the sound felt final. Not dramatic. Just final. Like a book shutting on a chapter no one would reread. The restaurant exhaled. Conversation resumed in cautious fragments. Plates arrived no one wanted. Wine went untouched. Life, somehow, insisted on continuing. Victor remained seated. His hands were empty. That struck him suddenly. No glass to hold. No phone. No excuse. Just his hands on the table, fingers spread as if bracing for impact that had already happened. Across from him, Mara did not look at him. She stared instead at the place where Evelyn's chair had been. An absence with weight. Her face had gone pale beneath the red mark. She looked smaller now, folded inward, as though she had shrunk to protect what mattered. Victor opened his mouth. Closed it. Tried again. Mara, he said. The name felt wrong in his mouth. Used up. She didn't answer. Helen sat beside Mara, not touching her now, but close enough that their shoulders nearly met. A quiet alliance. Victor felt suddenly like a guest at his own table. I should have stopped it, he said, to no one and everyone. I didn't think she would. You didn't think, Helen said, not unkindly. That's the problem. Victor flinched. He deserved that. He deserved worse. He looked at Mara then, really looked. Saw the way her jaw trembled, almost imperceptibly. Saw the way her hand kept circling her belly, slow and repetitive, like a prayer she didn't trust herself to say aloud. I froze, he said. I don't know why. I froze. Mara breathed in through her nose, out through her mouth. When she spoke, her voice was steady in a way that frightened him. You didn't freeze, she said. You chose stillness. The words landed softly. They cut anyway. Victor's chest tightened. I didn't choose her, he said quickly. Too quickly. I swear. I didn't. Helen shifted then, turning slightly toward him. Intent does not erase impact, she said. You know that. I taught you that. He nodded. He remembered. He remembered too much, suddenly. Lessons about honesty. About showing up. About protecting what cannot protect itself. Mara stood slowly. The movement seemed to take effort, as if gravity had increased. The chair scraped back. Victor half rose instinctively, reaching for her, then stopped himself. He didn't know if he was allowed. I need air, Mara said, not to him specifically. And I need to check on the baby. Helen was on her feet instantly. I'll come with you. No, Mara said gently. I need a minute alone. Helen hesitated, then nodded. I'll be right outside. Mara walked toward the restroom, each step deliberate. Victor watched her go, watched the way other diners looked away, embarrassed witnesses to a story they would never know fully. He felt exposed in a way he had never allowed himself to feel. When she was gone, Helen sat back down. Silence stretched between mother and son. A long one. The kind that didn't rush to fill itself. You disappointed me tonight, Helen said finally. He winced. I know. You didn't just disappoint me, she continued. You frightened me. That surprised him. How? Helen folded her hands. Because I saw how easily you let someone hurt the woman carrying your child. And I realized you might not know who you are anymore. Victor stared at the table. The linen bore a faint water ring where his glass had been. Evidence of a moment he had tried to hold on to and lost. I don't know how we got here, he said quietly. Helen's voice softened, but did not excuse. You stopped choosing, she said. You let comfort make your decisions. And comfort is a coward. He swallowed. Tears burned behind his eyes, unwanted and overdue. Is there a way back? Helen did not answer immediately. She looked toward the hallway where Mara had disappeared, her expression unreadable. "There is always a way to do better," she said at last. "That does not mean there is a way back to what you broke." The words settled into him like stones. Minutes passed. The pianist began again, a different piece now. Something uncertain. Something searching. Victor stood when Mara returned. She looked composed, but the mark on her cheek was darker now. Real. Unignorable. "The baby's fine," she said, before anyone asked. Relief hit him so hard he had to grip the chair. "Thank God." Mara met his eyes then. Held them. There was no anger there. That hurt more than anger would have. "I'm going to stay with Helen tonight," she said. "I need space. And safety." He nodded. He had no right to argue. "Okay." She paused, hand on the back of the chair. "You should know," she added, quietly. "What hurt wasn't the slap. It was the moment after. When I looked at you. And you were gone." Then she turned away. Victor watched her leave with his mother, watched the door close behind them, watched his reflection in the glass after they were gone. He sat back down alone at the table set for 4. The food was untouched. The silence was not. Mara slept lightly in Helen's guest room, the kind of sleep that never fully lets go. The sheets smelled faintly of lavender and old books. The house creaked in the small hours, settling into itself, reminding her that walls could hold you without asking anything back. She woke before dawn with one hand on her belly, breath caught halfway between fear and relief. The baby moved, a slow roll, as if stretching. Mara closed her eyes and let the motion anchor her. "You're here. I'm here. For now." That was enough. She padded to the kitchen barefoot. The floor was cool. Outside, the world was grey and undecided. Helen was already awake, standing at the counter with a mug cupped in both hands. She looked smaller in the early light, hair unpinned, shoulders slightly sloped with age and vigilance. "Couldn't sleep either," Helen said gently. Mara nodded. Words felt unnecessary. She took the mug Helen offered without asking what was in it. Warmth spread into her palms. Chamomile. Honey. Care, disguised as routine. They sat at the small table by the window. No tablecloth here. Just wood worn smooth by years of meals and difficult conversations. "I keep replaying it," Mara said finally. Not the slap. The second after. Where everything stopped. Helen watched the steam rise from her cup. "The mind does that," she said. "It circles the moment it thinks will teach it how to survive next time." Mara swallowed. "I don't know what next time looks like." "That's honest," Helen said. "Honesty is a kind of ground." They sat in silence again. Birds began to argue outside, loud and insistent, as if morning were a thing to be demanded. "I didn't plan it," Helen said after a while. Mara looked at her. "The papers. The timing. I've been preparing," Helen continued. "Not because I knew exactly what would happen. Because I knew something would." Mara nodded slowly. "You believed me." Helen's eyes met hers, steady. "I watched you," she said. "That's different." The words landed deep. Mara felt tears come then, sudden and hot. She covered her face, embarrassed by the intensity of it, but Helen reached across the table and rested her hand over Mara's wrist. "Not to stop the tears. Just to stay. I don't want my child to grow up thinking this is normal," Mara said, voice breaking. "That love looks like silence. Or absence." Helen's grip tightened. "They won't," she said. "Because you see it. And seeing is how cycles end." Later, Victor texted. A single line. "I'm sorry. I'm here when you're ready." Mara stared at the phone for a long time. The words felt thin, not because they weren't true, but because truth without action was just air. She set the phone face down. Helen watched her do it. Said nothing. By afternoon, the house filled with soft domestic sounds. Helen folded laundry. Mara sorted through a box of old baby clothes Helen had saved without ever saying why. Tiny socks. A faded Odyssey. Evidence of a life that had once begun in hope. "I was so afraid with Victor," Helen said, holding up a small sweater. I didn't know how to keep him safe from himself. Mara smiled sadly. I don't know how to keep mine safe from the world. You won't, Helen said. Not completely. But you'll teach them what safety feels like. That matters. As evening fell, Mara felt the ache in her back, the deep exhaustion that came from carrying both a body and a decision. She lay on the couch while Helen cooked, the smell of soup filling the room. For the first time in weeks, Mara felt something loosen inside her. Not healed. Just less clenched. Victor did not come. He didn't call again. That, too, was information. After dinner, Mara stood by the window, watching the last light drain from the sky. Helen joined her, close but not crowding. I don't know what happens now, Mara said. Helen nodded. Neither do I. The admission felt like permission. I do know, Helen added, that you don't owe anyone your endurance. Mara pressed her palm to the glass, feeling the cool. She thought of the restaurant, the polished cruelty of it, the way her pain had been almost elegant to look at. She thought of the slap, yes, but more of the empty space afterward. The space where Victor should have been. She turned back to the room, to the woman beside her, to the quiet strength that had not asked permission to exist. I think, Mara said slowly, that I'm done waiting for people to choose me. Helen smiled, small and proud. Good, she said. Choose yourself. Your child will follow. That night, Mara lay in bed again, one hand on her belly, the other resting on the place where a future might take shape. Outside, the house breathed. Inside, so did she. Somewhere, a table sat empty, linen stained by a ring of water no one would ever scrub out completely. Here, in the quiet, Mara let herself imagine a different sound. Not a slap. A first cry.